Hi guys, Sam here. Welcome to my first Should You Play video where I'll be discussing Clair Obscur Expedition 33. In this series, I'll break down the various aspects of a game, what worked for me, what didn't, and why, before ultimately answering the question, should you play? This video is spoiler free, so if you've already played the game and are looking for a more in-depth discussion, then I would recommend watching my rating video, which I'll link in the description. This was perhaps the game that I was most looking forward to playing in 2025, and it's certainly a very unique experience. Expedition 33 is a linear story with an explorable but not open world where the gameplay revolves around turn based combat. It took me about 49 hours to complete, although I did unfortunately miss some side content, so expect a few more hours if you get through everything. First, I want to talk about the world. As you move through the game, you have the opportunity to explore different areas, some for the main quest and others as side content. Each of them are individually spectacular, and taken together, they're really special. You have the feeling from start to finish that you're in some sort of fantasy, dreamlike world, and I had a feeling of wonder the entire time. There isn't a lot in terms of social world building, but there doesn't need to be. This isn't an in depth open world, rather, it's a directed but explorable experience. Think God of War 2018, linear in structure but with room to wander and discover. And don't expect for the world to have any simulation like rhythms or cycles. This is very much a place where NPCs stand in one spot the entire time, and it feels like you move through a series of set pieces rather than a living ecosystem. But that's a design choice, and not necessarily a problem in a game like this, even if it would add some more depth. Now, in terms of exploration, Expedition 33 does a fantastic job. The different areas of the game are just so different and beautiful that I wanted to see them all. And on top of that, there's various different encounters and experiences to come across that keep the exploration interesting and provide new content. There's a nice amount of detail in the world, little bits and pieces of things scattered everywhere that make it feel full of life and stuff, as though something's happened or is happening there. Occasionally, I'd come across something where I'd just kind of think to myself, like, huh, cool. Just like little details that you pick up on, which alone aren't anything spectacular, but which just add a nice touch if you come across them. And it's often these details that provide you with the context and background of the journey that you're undertaking in this game. I was, however, a little disappointed that there's no collision or interaction with the natural environment. Grass and foliage don't bend or move when you walk through them, and walking in water doesn't cause any ripples. Obviously, this won't ruin your experience, but they are things that I always like to see. And lastly, the atmosphere is strong. Graphically, the game is mesmerizing, but the lighting on PlayStation 5 does leave something to be desired, and the game opts for constant music over ambient sounds, which takes away from the immersion a bit in different locations. This isn't a huge issue given the phenomenal soundtrack, but combined with the subpar lighting, it means that many areas don't reach their full atmospheric potential. Next, I want to talk about the sound. And first of all, the soundtrack is simply magnificent. It's not just the quality, it's the incredible variety from classical to almost techno, shifting depending on what you're doing and where you are. And despite this very broad range of music, the game manages to maintain a clear identity, which is very impressive. And honestly, it's very brave to create a soundtrack like this due to the risk of parts sounding disjointed or out of place. Honestly, it's one of the best soundtracks I've heard for a long time. The voice acting is great, but I was never blown away, and I think this is due largely to the fact that it isn't the most dialogue heavy game. The focus is much more on combat, with relatively few dialogue passages. Most conversations happen in cutscenes, not in the world itself. Perhaps with a bit more screen time, the undoubtedly great voice actors would have been able to shine brighter. The sound effects are also outstanding. Not only are they detailed, but they're also precise and convey a sense of depth and impact when necessary. All of the characters' moves are really well highlighted by their accompanying sound, and it's this sort of detail that makes the combat feel so impactful and pleasing. From powerful and weighty to almost crystalline, Expedition 33 shows how effectively used sound effects give actions and objects a level of detail that can be descriptive and transformative. The audio is generally really well mixed. The volume levels are good, and nothing really gets in the way of anything else, except in one particular area which was just a bit chaotic, and where I actually had a few technical problems, but that was very minor. Next up, the gameplay. Expedition 33's combat is turn based, with each party member offering unique skills that unlock as you progress. What I liked most was how active it felt. It's not just about picking skills from a menu, you also dodge, parry, and counterattack, which adds a layer of interactivity. This was a very unique game for me. I haven't played that many turn based games or any JRPGs. The closest I've come is Baldur's Gate 3, which is very different. And I was hooked from the start. I think it's in the nature of turn based games. You're always thinking, just one more fight, which makes it incredibly addictive. The combat feels impactful and full of variety. The characters have different skills, and you go through this very cool world with the moves to match it, fighting enemies that look like someone's acid trip. I mean, how could that not be a good time? There are also some fun mini games to discover. I don't want to spoil anything, but you come across some activities that offer a nice change of pace and just something a bit different. But I can't lie, there was a point where the combat started to feel a little chore like. Attack patterns that I'd used from the start were still effective quite late into the game, and whilst they felt good at times, it was starting to become repetitive. I fell into autopilot, using the same skills with the same characters for every situation, and this was just one of the problems caused by the difficulty, or lack thereof. Expedition 33 is too easy, even on expert. Don't get me wrong, sometimes it would take me a while to beat bosses, but I was getting through all the main areas without too many problems. Now, things being a little too easy might not sound like such a big problem, but the issue was that it removed the need to interact deeply with what are some fantastic mechanics, or to get the most out of them. It also meant that at some point I was just on autopilot when leveling up my characters, always choosing the same attributes without any thought. Compare this to, say, Elden Ring, where investing every skill point is a nerve-wracking decision that requires serious deliberation. There's also quite a lot of unevenness in the difficulty between the side content and the main areas. In a game like this, the main areas should really be your compass in terms of where you're at. If you can't get past someone, then you probably need to go back and grind some side content. And if you're managing, then you're probably fine. So when I'd get through main areas with no big problems, I assumed I was about where I needed to be. I'd then do as much side content as I could, getting through the areas that seemed to be made for my level and leaving the ones that were far too difficult for later, because obviously I was going to need some more time and XP to get there. But then at some point, the game was just over, and there was a bunch of side content that I hadn't got to, which was really disappointing as I'd been trying to do everything I possibly could. I can't explain the situation fully for spoiler reasons, but essentially I was getting the wrong progression signals, and this cost me a bunch of side content that I really wanted to experience. So the issue isn't just that the game is too easy, it's that the difficulty actively undermines several of its core systems, and therefore the overall experience. Which is a shame because the core systems are great. One thing that I really love is that each character has their own mechanics and powers, which kept things fresh. I am personally a fan of the parrying and dodging system because it made the combat more interactive than just picking the best skills from the menu. Pulling off parries and counterattacks felt satisfying and powerful, and every time I just thought to myself, like, ha, nice try, but not today. That's also a camp mechanic, and I really like the idea of a camp in a game like this. In Baldur's Gate, it worked fantastically, for example. But I found that Expedition 33 doesn't do a very good job of making it a necessary place to visit, and this was another reason why I missed out on some side content. You can upgrade weapons and various resources at camp, but as I wasn't having any problems with the main areas, I just didn't really do this very often. But perhaps I learned this so that you don't have to. If you do play this game, then make sure to visit camp regularly. Don't forget it. Now, in terms of progression, the game uses Pictos and Lumina. Pictos are essentially boosts that you can give to one character and which have various effects. Then, after you've won a few fights with it equipped, it becomes available as a Lumina, which can be equipped by any party members if they have enough Lumina points, which you get more of as you progress. I found this system really clever. Being able to equip each Picto to only one character is smart because it means that you have to prioritize and think about how you want to build each character and shape their role. Then unlocking them as Lumina, usable by any character, lets you experiment without sacrificing these effects, as long as you've earned enough points. It also means you can get some crazy stacks at some point once you start to accumulate these Lumina points. There are also abilities that you can unlock with skill points as the characters level up. I thought these were okay. It's a pretty standard kind of skill tree setup where you work up to getting the most powerful skills for each player. The problem that I had with these was that I was having almost no trouble getting through the game using the skills that I got towards the start, which meant that there wasn't such a need to change them. I would have happily done this for the sake of variety, but what I had was working pretty well. Now, on the plus side, the skills can create synergies between characters, leading to various combat strategies and party constellations. Not to sound like a broken record, but this is again something that makes me wish the difficulty was better calibrated, as having to really think about which characters work best together and how they can support each other would have been a fun challenge. Now, onto the story. You play as Expedition 33, a group setting out to confront the mysterious paintress. Every year, she paints a new number on a distant monolith, and anyone at or above that age dies. It's a fascinating premise with huge stakes. Now, on paper, the premise of this story is uniquely fascinating and had the potential to be generational. But for me, at least, it was a big letdown, even though I've read a lot of opinions from people who were deeply moved. So it seems to be pretty divisive. There are surprises and twists, but they just didn't land for me. Whilst the setup is pretty good and kept me intrigued for a while, I found the pacing to be jarring and thought that the story would have really benefited from filling some of the emptier passages. On top of that, it raises big moral questions, then ignores them completely. So I appreciate the story that the game is trying to tell, but from my point of view, it just missed the mark. The characters are nice, I like them, and I was happy to spend time with them, but honestly, I never felt a strong emotional connection to them. And the reason for this is that there just aren't many character building scenes. Of the 49 hours that I played, I feel like I maybe spent an hour with the characters, which just isn't enough for a bond to develop. If you're going to spend so little time with them, their personalities need to stand out immediately. But they don't. Although I did love all of the side characters, even though they get less screen time and the story isn't even primarily about them, because they're captivating from the moment you meet them and stand out in a way that none of the main cast do. Honestly, they deserve their own game or even show. They're extremely unique and provide a refreshing contrast to the game's otherwise gloomy tone. The side quests are fine. They don't add much narratively, they're just more like optional activities along the way. But that said, I did unintentionally miss a bunch of side content, so perhaps that added more value. Next, I'll discuss the technical aspects of the game for the PlayStation 5. I didn't have a single crash, and I didn't encounter a single bug throughout the entire game, which runs excellently with 60 FPS in performance mode. There's some clipping and collision issues, but they won't meaningfully impact your experience. The lip syncing, however, is frustratingly bad. Now, despite these positives, Expedition 33 doesn't fully utilize the PS5's power. Although the frame rate was pretty solid at 60 FPS, the resolution leaves a lot to be desired. The game is by no means bad looking, but according to Digital Foundry, the resolution is less than 1080p, which is the absolute minimum that I would expect on a PlayStation 5. Lastly, I'll talk about the visual elements of Expedition 33. The art in this game is simply on another level and unlike anything I've experienced. You know, there are a lot of games with very cool art, but there's usually some degree of familiarity there, like a remaster of something you've seen before. But not in Expedition 33. It starts off really strong and just doesn't let up. One area in particular literally gave me shivers and almost made me cry because of how beautiful it was. The key to the beauty of this game is the diversity of its creativity. Each level is uniquely beautiful, with vaguely familiar elements looking reimagined in a painter's acid trip, and all of these crazy areas and things that you see within them added to the sense of wonder that I felt throughout the entire game. And despite the fact that all of the different areas are very unique artistically, the game still manages to come across as a coherent art piece. Nothing feels disjointed or out of place in any way. And it's not only the world design. The characters and various enemies are also fantastic and full of character, and even the expedition's outfits are charming. The UI also reflects this attention to detail with a consistent Art Deco style that ties everything together. Honestly, the art alone is almost enough of a reason just to recommend this game. It's something that has to be experienced. Now, the graphic quality is very good, but it's not something that's going to blow anyone away. It feels very typical UE5. There aren't any glaring issues, no bad assets or textures, but everything has a slight graininess typical of this engine, which is compounded by the sub 1080p resolution. And last of all, I'll touch on the cinematography, which is another area where this game more than excels. The opening scenes simply blew me away and were a confident statement that told me I was in for an incredible artistic experience, and I was enchanted from that point on. The cinematography in Expedition 33 feels bold and daring. This game is artistic to an extent that very few are, which isn't a slight against any other games in any way, but here the artistry is just so heavily exaggerated without becoming too much. And that applies to the cinematography as much as it does to the style and art direction. Different techniques are used masterfully in different moments to create impressions and emotions, and even in combat, the drama is elevated by a dynamic camera that uses zoom and perspective to frame moves, counters, characters, and enemies differently to create a sense of impact and scale. So, should you play Expedition 33? Well, it's hard for me to give a simple answer because my feelings about this game are complicated. The story was a big disappointment for me, but for others, it was incredibly moving, so it could be either for you. If you're unsure about turn based combat, then don't worry, it's beginner friendly. But if turn based combat just isn't really your thing, I wouldn't recommend this game because that's essentially all the gameplay is. If you like that sort of combat or are open to trying it and you think you'd appreciate the art and the music, then yes, I would absolutely recommend this game. In those regards, Expedition 33 is on a different level to anything that I've played in recent times, or perhaps ever. It's exaggerated, bold, and wondrous, and I think these parts alone are worth experiencing, regardless of how I might feel about the other aspects. If you like that sort of combat, or are open to trying it, but aren't really bothered about art or music, then I would be hesitant, as those are the aspects that carried the game for me. So let me know, does this sound like your kind of game? Otherwise, I would like to say a big thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to like and subscribe, as they say. And I hope you have a nice day.